At 3:17 in the morning, Ethan Whitmore learned that a wedding could feel less like a promise and more like a trap closing quietly around his throat. He woke to his mother crying in the hallway, his father speaking in that low, controlled voice he only used when money, reputation, or danger had entered the house, and the sharp, impossible emptiness coming from the room across from his. Noah's room. Ethan sat up too fast, his blanket sliding to his waist, his heart already running ahead of him. For one stupid second, he thought his twin had overslept. Noah did that sometimes, even though he acted like perfection had personally raised him. Then Ethan saw the open door, the stripped bed, the closet hanging half empty, and the red words written across the vanity mirror in their mother's lipstick. "Tell Ethan I'm sorry." The house went silent around those 4 words. Not peaceful silent, not sleeping silent. The kind of silence that felt like every wall had leaned closer to listen. Ethan stepped into the room barefoot, the hardwood cold under his feet, and stared at the message until the letters blurred. Noah was gone. No suitcase. No phone. No note besides an apology that explained absolutely nothing and somehow made everything worse. By 3:42, Ethan was standing in the middle of his own bedroom, while 2 family staff members moved around him with shaking hands, pulling a black tailored suit from a garment bag that had Noah's name stitched inside the collar. By 3:49, his father was telling him to stop asking questions. By 3:56, his mother was fastening silver cufflinks around his wrists like she was preparing him for a funeral instead of an engagement ceremony. Ethan laughed once, small and wrong, because the alternative was screaming. "This is insane," he said, but no one looked at him. He and Noah were identical from a distance. Same pale skin, same soft brown hair, same gray-blue eyes people always called pretty before they learned Ethan hated being compared. But Noah stood straighter. Noah smiled colder. Noah knew how to enter a room like he owned the floor beneath him. Ethan entered rooms hoping nobody noticed the way his hands trembled. And now his family wanted him to become Noah before sunrise, because the Blackwell family did not accept embarrassment, broken contracts, or missing Omega fiancés. Especially not Damian Blackwell, the Mafia alpha whose name made grown men lower their voices. Ethan had never met him. He had only seen pictures: black hair, ice blue eyes, a face too calm to be kind, and a stare that looked like it could turn secrets into confessions. At 4:10, Ethan found a silver ring on Noah's nightstand, cold as winter and carrying a scent that was not his brother's. Beneath it was one more message, scratched into the paper like Noah had written it in a hurry. "Don't trust the groom." Ethan's stomach dropped. Downstairs, a car waited in the driveway, black and shining under the porch lights. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, not comforting, just heavy. "Remember," he said, "tonight you are Noah." Ethan looked at the mirror and saw his twin's suit, his own terrified eyes, and a life that had just been stolen before dawn. The car ride to the Blackwell estate lasted 27 minutes, and Ethan spent every one of them trying to remember how to breathe like someone who had not just been handed another person's life before breakfast. The city outside the tinted window was still half asleep, all empty sidewalks, glowing streetlights, and coffee shops preparing to open for people whose biggest problem was probably a slow Wi-Fi connection. Ethan almost hated them for it. He sat stiffly in Noah's suit, fingers locked together in his lap, the silver ring tucked inside his jacket pocket like a secret with teeth. His mother sat beside him without speaking. His father rode up front, making calls in a voice so calm it made Ethan want to throw up. No one mentioned the message. No one mentioned the warning. "Do not trust the groom." Those 4 words kept circling in Ethan's head until they stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a countdown. When the car finally turned through the iron gates of Blackwell Manor, Ethan forgot every complaint he had ever made about his own family's house. The place was enormous, all pale stone, black-framed windows, and perfectly trimmed hedges stretching across acres of private land like the estate had been designed by someone who thought comfort was suspicious. Security stood at every entrance. Cameras followed the car with silent little turns. Even the fountain in the circular driveway looked expensive enough to have its own lawyer. Great, Ethan thought. Very welcoming. Nothing says romance like surveillance and emotional frostbite. His mother squeezed his wrist once, too hard, then let go before the door opened. Inside, the manor smelled like polished wood, white roses, and something colder underneath, something sharp and clean that made Ethan's Omega instincts sit up in alarm. Not fear exactly. Recognition. That was worse. The engagement hall was already full. Men and women in dark suits turned as Ethan entered, their attention sliding over him with polite smiles that did not reach their eyes. He could feel them measuring his posture, his expression, his scent blockers, his ability to lie without falling apart in public. Unfortunately, Ethan was very close to falling apart in public. He walked beside his parents toward the front of the room, where a long table held 2 crystal glasses, a silver contract plate, and a ring box lined in black velvet. His mouth went dry. Then the conversations died. Not faded. Died. Ethan looked up. Damien Blackwell had entered from the far side of the hall, and suddenly every rumor Ethan had heard seemed embarrassingly underdramatic. Damien was tall, dressed in a black suit that fit like it had been threatened into perfection, with dark hair brushed back from a face too composed to be called handsome, without also calling it dangerous. His eyes were pale blue, steady and unreadable, and when they landed on Ethan, the room seemed to tilt half an inch. Ethan forced himself not to step back. Noah would not step back. Noah would probably smirk. Ethan tried. It came out like a facial cramp. Damien crossed the room with quiet control, stopping close enough for Ethan to catch the edge of his scent beneath whatever blockers he wore. Cedar, winter air, and rain on stone. Ethan hated that it steadied him. Damien took his hand. His fingers were warm. Careful. That was the first thing Ethan did not expect. The second was the way Damien leaned slightly closer, eyes narrowing just enough to make Ethan's heart forget its job. "You are not Noah," Damien said softly, so softly no one else could hear. Ethan's entire body turned to glass. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Damien's thumb brushed once over Ethan's knuckles, not comforting exactly, not threatening either, just a small controlled touch that said he had already known the answer before asking the question. Ethan waited for him to expose him, to call the room to attention, to end the lie his family had shoved him into. Instead, Damien turned toward the gathered guests, lifted Ethan's trembling hand, and said in a voice smooth enough to cut through every whisper, "This is my fiancée." The room erupted into applause, polite, measured, terrifying applause. Ethan smiled because everyone was watching. Damien did not let go of his hand. And when Ethan looked up at him, searching for anger, accusation, anything that made sense, Damien only lowered his voice again and said, "Do not run yet, Ethan Whitmore. Not until you know who wanted your brother gone." For one impossible second, Ethan forgot the room was full of people. He forgot his parents were standing behind him like beautifully dressed strangers. He forgot the cameras, the polished marble floor, the flowers arranged in white and silver, the 100 cold eyes waiting for him to perform a lie with a straight spine and a borrowed name. All he could hear was Damien Blackwell saying his real name like it had never belonged to anyone else. Ethan Whitmore. Not Noah. Ethan. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Damien still held his hand, calm as midnight, while applause moved through the hall like rain against glass. Ethan wanted to ask how he knew. He wanted to ask why he had not exposed him. He wanted, most urgently, to ask why Damien's warning had sounded less like a threat and more like someone pulling him back from the edge of a cliff. But then the officiant cleared his throat, and the room remembered its ceremony. The man standing behind the silver contract plate was old, narrow, and severe, with white gloves and a face that suggested he had personally disapproved of joy since 1978. He gestured toward the 2 rings resting in the velvet box. "The Blackwell bond contract requires a bloodline acknowledgement," he announced. "A symbolic touch only. No claim. No permanent bond. Just enough to awaken the legal seal." Ethan almost laughed again. Symbolic. Sure. Because nothing screamed harmless symbolism like ancient silver, Mafia witnesses, and an alpha who apparently knew his identity before Ethan had finished pretending to be brave. His father stepped closer behind him and whispered, "Steady hands." Ethan hated that his hands shook harder. Damien noticed. Of course he noticed. The man seemed built out of notice. Without looking away from the officiant, Damien shifted his grip so Ethan's fingers rested more securely in his palm. It was barely anything. A quiet adjustment. A small act no one else would understand. Somehow, it kept Ethan standing. The officiant lifted a small ceremonial pin, no larger than a cufflink needle, and Ethan's stomach curled. Damien's voice cut in before Ethan could panic. Mine first. The hall went still. The officiant blinked. Traditionally, the Omega bloodline signs first. Damien's gaze did not move. Tradition can wait 10 seconds. No one argued. That was the strange thing about Damien Blackwell. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The officiant touched the pin to Damien's finger, then guided one drop onto the silver plate. The engraved lines glowed faintly blue, like moonlight under ice. A murmur traveled through the room. Then it was Ethan's turn. He told himself it was nothing. One tiny sting. Less dramatic than stepping on a Lego, which he had once done and survived with only minor emotional damage. The pin touched his finger. A red bead welled up. The moment it fell onto the plate, the entire contract flared white. Not pale blue. Not polite ceremonial moonlight. White, bright, and sudden enough that half the room gasped. Ethan jerked back, but Damien caught his wrist before he could stumble. The rings lifted from the box by themselves, spinning slowly above the velvet, as if invisible hands had found them. The officiant's face drained of color. That is not possible, he whispered. Ethan looked from the glowing plate to Damien. What is happening? Damien's expression had changed for the first time. Not much. Just a crack in the ice. Surprise. Real surprise. The officiant read the moving script forming across the contract, each word burning itself into the silver. Chosen Omega confirmed. Primary compatibility confirmed. Ethan Whitmore recognized as the intended bond match. The room stopped breathing. Ethan felt the floor vanish beneath him without moving an inch. His mother made a small broken sound. His father said nothing, which was somehow worse. Ethan stared at the words until they rearranged his entire life. Not Noah. Him. It had always been him. Damien's hand tightened around his wrist, protective now, unmistakably protective. Ethan looked up, voice barely there. Did you know? Damien's jaw flexed once. No. Then his eyes shifted toward Ethan's father, cold enough to frost the air between them. But I think someone did. The glow from the contract did not fade all at once. It pulsed through the silver plate in slow, quiet waves, as if the thing had a heartbeat and had just decided Ethan was part of it. The entire hall remained frozen around him. No one clapped now. No one whispered. Even the flowers seemed to hold their breath, which was ridiculous, because flowers did not breathe, and Ethan was very aware that he was having strange thoughts because his brain had chosen this exact public disaster to leave the building. Damien still had a hand around his wrist, not tight, not possessive, just steady enough to keep Ethan from swaying into the contract table and making the worst engagement ceremony in Massachusetts history even more embarrassing. Ethan looked at his father. His father looked at the glowing words and nodded at him. That was the answer before anyone said anything. You knew, Ethan whispered. His voice sounded too small for the room. His mother covered her mouth, eyes shining, but her silence had edges. His father adjusted his cufflink, a tiny motion so normal that Ethan hated him for it. We did what was necessary for this family, he said. Something inside Ethan went very still. Not calm, not brave, still like a lake, right before the ice cracks. For this family, Ethan repeated, because apparently his mouth had decided to test how betrayal tasted when spoken out loud. Damien stepped slightly in front of him, subtle enough to look like ceremony positioning, deliberate enough for Ethan to understand. The officiant tried to lift the contract plate, but the silver flashed again, and the man snatched his hands back with a startled breath. The legal seal has accepted, he said, voice uneven. Until formal review, the bond engagement is active. Active. Ethan almost laughed. He had woken up single, confused, and wearing pajama pants with cartoon bears on them. Now he was legally engaged to the most feared alpha in the room because an ancient contract had better reading comprehension than his entire family. Damien turned toward the guests, his expression smooth again, but colder than before. This ceremony is concluded. No one moved. Then he added, with quiet finality, everyone leaves. This time, people obeyed. Chairs scraped. Shoes whispered across marble. Ethan stood in the center of it all while his old life emptied out of the room one expensive suit at a time. His parents tried to approach, but 2 Blackwell staff members blocked them without touching anyone. Ethan should have felt grateful. He mostly felt hollow. Damien looked down at him. You are coming with me to the manor residence wing. Ethan blinked. I am sorry, coming with you where? You are not safe here. That sounds a lot like kidnapping with better interior design. A flicker passed through Damien's eyes. Amusement, maybe. Very small. Very inconvenient. You may call your lawyer from my office. You may call the police if you want. You may call every news station in Boston. But until we understand who altered this contract and where your brother is, you should not remain with people who delivered you to it. Ethan hated that the sentence made sense. He hated even more that Damien said it like a fact, not a command. 5 minutes later, Ethan was walking through a private corridor of Blackwell Manor with 2 staff members several steps behind them and Damien beside him, close but not crowding. The hallway lights were warm, but the walls were lined with old portraits that made the place feel like a museum built by secrets. Ethan finally pulled his wrist free, mostly because he needed to prove he could. Damien let go immediately. That surprised him. Again, Ethan rubbed his wrist though it did not hurt. You knew I was not Noah, he said. Damien looked ahead. Yes. Then why did you claim me in front of everyone? Damien stopped at a tall black door and turned to him. Because if I had exposed you before the contract activated, your father would have taken you home, hidden the evidence, and blamed your brother for everything. Ethan swallowed. And now? Now, Damien said, opening the door to a quiet office overlooking the dark gardens. You are the evidence. Ethan stared at Damien's office like it was waiting to judge him and had already taken notes. The room was all dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a wall of windows looking over the back gardens, where white gravel paths curved through black hedges under the pale morning sky. It should have been beautiful. It mostly felt like being placed inside a very expensive box. Damien walked to the desk, pressed a button beneath the edge, and the glass doors behind them locked with a soft click. Ethan turned so fast his shoulder bumped a bookshelf. Absolutely not, he said. I am not doing locked rooms with Mafia furniture. Damien lifted both hands slowly, palms open, like Ethan was a startled animal, and he knew it. Privacy glass, soundproofing, security lock. You can open it from your side. Ethan looked at the door panel. A small green button glowed beside the handle. Annoyingly considerate. Even more annoyingly, real. He pressed it. The doors unlocked. He pressed it again. Locked. He did it a third time because panic deserved scientific confirmation. Damien watched without comment. Good, Ethan muttered. I hate that you passed that test. I was desperate for you to fail it. A faint shadow crossed Damien's mouth. Almost a smile, but it disappeared before Ethan could accuse it of existing. Your brother left something behind, Damien said. The ring? Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the silver band from Noah's nightstand. Damien's expression sharpened, but he did not touch it. Not mine. Not Blackwell. Ethan set it on the desk, as if it might start explaining itself out of guilt. It carried another alpha scent. Damien leaned closer, just enough to catch the trace, then went very still. That scent belongs to a man named Victor Hale. He handles contract law for old Omega families. Ethan blinked. My father's attorney? Formerly, Damien said. Now he works for whoever pays best. Fantastic. So my life was outsourced to a morally flexible paperwork goblin. Damien's eyes flicked to him. Paperwork goblin? Ethan folded his arms. It is a legal classification I just invented. Try to keep up. The almost smile returned, smaller this time, and Ethan hated how much it warmed the edge of the room. Then he remembered Noah was missing, his family had lied, and an ancient contract had just turned him into the main character of a nightmare with catering. The warmth vanished. He looked down at the suit jacket, suddenly aware of a stiff seam near the inside pocket. Noah's jacket. Noah's name in the collar. Ethan slid his fingers along the lining and felt something hard tucked beneath a loose stitch. His breath caught. Damien noticed instantly. What is it? Ethan did not answer. He tugged until the thread snapped, then pulled out a tiny black flash drive no bigger than his thumbnail. For a second, neither of them moved. The office felt larger around them, deeper, as if the walls had stepped back to make room for whatever this was. Damien opened a drawer, took out a secure laptop, and placed it on the desk facing Ethan. Your choice, he said. Ethan looked at the drive, then at him. You are asking? Always, Damien said. The word landed quietly. Not dramatic. Not romantic. Just firm enough to make Ethan's throat tighten. He nodded once. Damien inserted the drive. One video file appeared. The name was simple. For Ethan. Ethan's knees nearly forgot their job. Damien pulled out the chair, but did not touch him. Ethan sat because standing was no longer a reliable plan. The video opened to Noah sitting in what looked like a motel room, hair messy, face pale, still unmistakably Ethan's mirror and not Ethan at all. Noah leaned close to the camera. "If you are watching this, they made you take my place." Ethan covered his mouth. Noah swallowed on screen. "I am sorry. I tried to stop it. You were never the spare, Ethan. You were the match. Mom and Dad knew when we were 12. The contract shows your bloodline compatibility, but you were too gentle, too easy to scare, too hard to use in front of men like them. So they trained me to stand in your shadow until the day they could hand you over and call it destiny." Ethan felt the room tilt. Damien's hand moved toward him, then stopped halfway, waiting. Noah's voice cracked through the speakers. "Damien Blackwell is not the one who sold you. He may be dangerous, but he is not the reason I ran. I disappeared because I found proof, and if I stayed, they would bury it under signatures and smiles. Trust no one from our house. Find Victor Hale. And Ethan, please, for once in your life, do not make yourself smaller so other people can survive their own lies." The video ended. The silence afterward was unbearable. Ethan stared at his own reflection in the black laptop screen, wearing Noah's suit, holding Noah's secret, feeling his entire childhood rewrite itself in real time. Damien spoke softly. "Ethan." He almost did not recognize his name without someone else's expectation attached to it. Then his hands started shaking, not from fear this time, but from something sharper, something awake. Ethan looked at Damien through the blur in his eyes and said, "I want every file your family has on mine." Damien did not ask whether Ethan was sure. He only opened a secure cabinet behind his desk, placed his thumb against a hidden scanner, and pulled out 3 thick folders stamped with the Whitmore crest in black ink. Ethan hated how prepared that looked. He hated the clean labels, the dates, the neat paper clips holding together years of things his family had never said out loud. Childhood evaluations, compatibility reports, private medical approvals, marriage projections. His life had been documented like a business plan while he was busy being 12 and worried about whether his braces made him look like a raccoon with anxiety. For nearly an hour, Ethan sat in Damien's office reading pieces of himself written by strangers. Too emotionally reactive. High omega compatibility. Low public resilience. Better suited for private transfer after family stabilization. Private transfer. He stared at those 2 words until they stopped looking like English. Damien stood by the window with a phone to his ear, speaking quietly to someone named Marisol about locating Victor Hale, freezing Whitmore Communications, and keeping the press outside the North Gate. He sounded controlled, efficient, terrifying in the way a locked door was terrifying, but never once did he sound careless with Ethan. That should not have mattered. It did. When Ethan finally closed the last folder, the sun had lifted over the gardens, turning the windows pale gold. His stomach growled so loudly it betrayed him with the confidence of a tiny monster. Damien paused mid-sentence and looked over. Ethan covered his abdomen with the folder. That was the chair. Damien ended the call. "The chair is hungry?" "Extremely. It has been through a lot." Without comment, Damien pressed the intercom and ordered breakfast. Not a feast, not some dramatic mansion nonsense, just coffee, toast, eggs, fruit, and chamomile tea because apparently the man had decided Ethan looked like he was one inconvenience away from dissolving into carpet fibers. Annoyingly accurate. Before the tray arrived, the office door opened and a woman in a cream pantsuit stepped in without knocking. She had silver blonde hair cut to her chin, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that made apologies seem illegal. Damien's sister, Ethan realized before she introduced herself. Evelyn Blackwell. She looked Ethan over once, not unkindly, just thoroughly. "So this is the real fiancé." Ethan blinked. "Wow. Good morning to you too, emotionally expensive stranger." Evelyn's mouth twitched. Damien sighed like he had aged 6 months in 1 second. "Evelyn, not now. Unfortunately, now is all we have," she said, setting a tablet on the desk. "The council wants an internal review in the East Room. Your uncles are already there, along with 3 attorneys and 1 man who keeps saying Omega stability as if he has ever stabilized anything in his life." Ethan stood too quickly. "No, absolutely no. I just learned my entire family used me as a human contract clause. I am not attending a breakfast seminar on my emotional packaging." Damien stepped closer, stopping a full arm's length away. You do not have to speak. You do not have to prove anything. Then why do I have to go? Because if you do not, they will speak about you as if you are not here. That landed hard. 10 minutes later, Ethan walked into the East Room beside Damien with toast in one hand and pure dread in the other. The room was long, bright, and filled with alphas in tailored suits whose attention hit him like cold weather. Their scents were muted but still present, layered under cologne and polished wood, heavy enough to make Ethan's lungs tighten. One older man leaned back and said, "The Omega looks overwhelmed." The toast cracked in Ethan's grip. Damien moved before Ethan could answer, stepping between him and the table with calm, devastating precision. The pressure in the room changed. Not louder, lower. Every alpha present went still. Damien's scent settled around Ethan like cedar and winter rain, not trapping him, just blocking the rest. Ethan inhaled and hated how much easier it became. Damien's voice was soft. "No one gets to scare him in my house. Not even me." The room said nothing. Ethan looked at Damien's back, broad and still, and felt something inside his chest shift one careful inch away from fear. Ethan had expected the East Room to feel like a courtroom, but somehow it was worse, because courtrooms at least pretended to care about justice. This room cared about power, polished oak, and whether anyone had the courage to look guilty while wearing a $3,000 suit. Damien remained standing between Ethan and the long table, his presence quiet but absolute, while Evelyn took the seat nearest the window and opened her tablet with the expression of a woman preparing to ruin several powerful men before lunch. Ethan liked her immediately. He was terrified of her, obviously, but in a respectful way. One of Damien's uncles, a silver-haired man named Conrad Blackwell, folded his hands and offered a smile so thin it looked printed on. "No one is trying to frighten the boy, Damien. We simply need to verify whether he is stable enough to remain under Blackwell protection." Ethan felt the word boy land on his skin like dust. Before Damien could answer, Ethan stepped around him. It was possibly the worst idea his survival instincts had ever approved, but his mouth had already filed the paperwork. "I'm standing right here," he said. "My ears work. My vocabulary is decent. My patience is currently on life support, but that is more of a situational issue." The room went silent. Evelyn looked down at her tablet, definitely hiding a smile. Damien did not turn, but Ethan saw his shoulder ease by half an inch. Conrad's smile sharpened. "Then you understand, Mr. Whitmore, that the contract must be handled delicately. A mismatched Omega could cause complications." Ethan stared at him. "Mismatched?" The silver plate lit up like a Christmas tree and announced my government name in front of half of Boston. "I feel many things today, but mismatched is not one of them." Across the table, a younger attorney coughed into his hand. Evelyn slid her tablet forward, projecting documents onto the wall screen. The original Blackwell-Whitmore contract was amended 14 years ago. The public version names Noah Whitmore as the intended fiancé. The sealed version does not. It names the compatible Omega child of William and Claire Whitmore. Ethan's stomach tightened. 14 years ago. He had been 12. Damien's voice went colder. "Who authorized the amendment?" Evelyn tapped the screen. "Victor Hale notarized it. William Whitmore signed it. And the Blackwell family witness was Malcolm Blackwell." Damien went very still. Not surprised this time. Something deeper. Older. The room changed around that name. Even Conrad looked away. Ethan looked up at Damien. "Malcolm was your father, right?" Damien said nothing for a moment. "Then yes." His voice had lost its steel and found stone instead. Conrad leaned forward. "This is irrelevant. Malcolm is gone. The past cannot speak for itself." Damien looked at him, and for the first time Ethan saw not the Mafia alpha everyone feared, but a man standing in the shadow of a house that had taught him control by making pain look like duty. "The past speaks every day in this family," Damien said. "You just call it tradition." No one answered. Evelyn's expression softened, barely. Damien turned toward Ethan, and his voice lowered enough that it felt separate from the room. "My mother was bound by a contract like this. Not the same document, but the same system. A bond agreement disguised as protection. She spent years being told her fear was loyalty, her silence was grace, and her choices were already made for her." Ethan forgot the table, forgot Conrad, forgot the legal language glowing on the wall. Damien looked at the contract files as if they had teeth. I was 16 when I promised myself I would never use a bond to own anyone. Then this morning, the same machine placed you in front of me. Ethan's throat tightened. You hate the contract too. Damien met his eyes. More than you know. The honesty was so plain it hurt. Not dramatic. Not polished. Just a door opening into a room Damien clearly never let anyone enter. Ethan wanted to say something sharp, something protective and ridiculous, because feelings without sarcasm made him feel underdressed. Instead, he said, "Then help me burn it down legally." Evelyn clicked her pen. Finally, a productive engagement. By noon, Ethan had learned 3 things about Blackwell Manor. First, every hallway looked like it had been designed to confuse guests and intimidate ghosts. Second, Evelyn Blackwell could locate financial records faster than most people could find their car keys. Third, Damien became dangerously quiet whenever his father was mentioned, which somehow made Ethan want to stand closer to him and also throw a decorative vase through a window. Neither seemed like a responsible emotional response. They spent the next several hours inside Damien's office, building a timeline from old contracts, family transfers, adoption records, medical reports, and emails so dry they felt personally insulting. Marisol, Damien's head of security, called every 20 minutes with updates on Victor Hale. No confirmed address. No active office. 3 disconnected phone numbers. 1 closed bank account. 1 private storage unit. Under a shell company in Providence. Ethan sat cross-legged in a leather chair with his shoes off, because after being legally trapped by a glowing engagement plate, he felt entitled to disrespect expensive furniture. Damien pretended not to notice. Evelyn noticed and approved. Around 4 in the afternoon, Marisol entered the office carrying a sealed evidence bag and the expression of someone who had found a snake in a birthday cake. "We located Hale's storage unit," she said. It was empty except for this. Inside the bag was a motel key card and a folded receipt from a gas station outside Worcester. Ethan stood so quickly the folders slid off his lap. Worcester? Noah filmed the video in a motel. Damien took the receipt, eyes narrowing. This was printed 2 days ago. Evelyn typed rapidly on her tablet. There are 11 motels within 5 miles of that gas station. Damien looked at Marisol. Check them quietly. No uniforms. No public record. Ethan grabbed his jacket. "I am going." "No," Damien said immediately. Ethan turned on him. Absolutely stunning attempt. Terrible outcome. Try again. Damien's jaw tightened. This could be a trap. "My brother is the bait," Ethan said. "Do not ask me to sit here drinking calming tea while strangers decide whether he is worth finding." The room fell silent. Damien looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You stay beside me." Ethan wanted to argue on principle, but the words "beside me" did something inconvenient to his ribs. "Fine. But if anyone calls me fragile, I am haunting this family aggressively." Evelyn looked up. "I will support that in writing." The drive to Worcester took less than an hour, though Ethan felt every mile in his pulse. Damien sat beside him in the back seat, not touching, not crowding, just present in a way Ethan was starting to recognize as his version of concern. Outside, Massachusetts blurred into winter bare trees, highway signs, and gray afternoon light. At the 3rd motel, a tired clerk remembered Noah because he had paid cash, asked for a room facing the rear exit, and looked like someone who had not slept in days. Ethan's heart climbed into his throat and stayed there. Room 112 was empty when they arrived. The bed was made. The curtains were half closed. A paper cup sat beside the sink. For one awful second, Ethan thought they were too late. Then Damien lifted a hand, listening. A faint sound came from the utility room behind the motel office. Not a shout. Not a crash. A weak knock. Ethan reached the door first, ignoring Damien's sharp intake of breath behind him. Inside, sitting on the floor between stacked towels and cleaning supplies, was Noah. Pale, exhausted, alive. Ethan forgot how to move. Noah looked up, and for the first time in their lives, he did not look like the stronger twin. He looked 19 again, scared and stubborn and terribly sorry. "Ethan," he whispered. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of him, hands hovering because he was afraid touching him would make this less real. "You absolute idiot," Ethan said, voice breaking. "You left me a flash drive and trauma. That is not a plan." Noah gave a tiny laugh that almost became a sob. Damien stood in the doorway, still as a shadow. Noah saw him and stiffened, but not with fear. With recognition. "I was wrong about one thing. Noah said. The groom was never the danger. Ethan's chest tightened. Then who was? Noah looked at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and truth. Dad. He planned all of it. My disappearance, the contract reveal, even Victor Hale running. He wanted the contract to choose you in front of witnesses so no one could undo it without starting a family war. Damien's expression went ice cold. Noah swallowed. And there is one more thing. Malcolm Blackwell did not amend the contract alone. Ethan felt the room tilt. Noah reached into his pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out a second key card, black instead of white. Victor left proof at the manor before he vanished. Not in the office. In the old wine cellar beneath the east wing. Evelyn called it at the exact same moment Damien's phone lit up. Her voice came through the speaker, sharp and breathless. Damien, someone just opened the cellar door from inside the house. The drive back to Blackwell Manor felt too short and endless, as if Ethan's life had abandoned logic when the contract plate glowed. Noah sat beside him in Damien's spare coat, pale but awake, gripping the black key card while Damien gave low orders and Marisol locked down the estate. Evelyn waited in the east wing with controlled fury. The cellar is secure, she said. Conrad was inside. Damien's expression did not move, but the air sharpened. The wine cellar smelled of dust, stone, and secrets. A hidden safe stood behind the shelves, Conrad pretending offense, while William Whitmore appeared on a screen and went gray. Using Noah's key card and Victor Hale's code, Marisol opened it. Inside were files, recordings, transfers, and the amendment sealed by Malcolm Blackwell and William Whitmore, with Conrad's payments proving he kept the machine alive. Evelyn read the truth aloud. The Whitmores concealed Ethan as the true match. The Blackwell senior line would enforce the contract, and Victor was paid to alter records and disappear. Ethan heard his father say, "You do not understand what we were protecting." He did not fold. "You were protecting your deal, not me." Conrad sneered that the contract was active, that an Omega could not walk away from family duty. Ethan looked at the silver ring, understanding that fear, not metal, had trapped him. He removed it and set it on the table. "You sold me, hid me, traded me, and called it destiny. Damien protected me as a person. Now I choose for myself." The contract plate dimmed, as if old magic recognized consent. Damien knelt, not to claim, but to ask. "Ethan Whitmore, may I court you properly, with no contract deciding for you?" Noah muttered, "Say yes before I pass out." Ethan laughed, held out his hand, and chose himself.